The car had been sitting behind the chain-link fence for 11 years. Not abandoned. Not exactly. Just, forgotten. The distinction mattered. At least to the woman who still couldn't drive past the lot without looking away. The silver coupe sat beneath layers of dust and weather, its paint dulled by seasons of rain and summer heat. Weeds grew around its tires. Moss crept along the lower panels. One headlight remained cracked from an accident no insurance company had ever fully explained. Most people who passed it assumed it belonged to the scrapyard. Most people were wrong. Because sometimes the most valuable things in the world aren't valuable because of what they're worth. They're valuable because of what they remember. And this particular car remembered everything. It remembered a marriage. It remembered a family. It remembered a life that no longer existed. The woman who owned it had once possessed everything money could buy. Now she barely possessed herself. And nobody. Not the lawyers, the engineers, the restoration specialists, or the automotive experts she'd hired, had managed to solve the mystery that kept the car silent. Until a man nobody noticed looked at it differently. But that part comes later. Because every story like this begins the same way. With someone being judged. And someone being underestimated. The morning Marcus Hale first saw the coupe, the sky hung low over the coastal town of Blackwater Harbor. Fog drifted in from the water. The air smelled faintly of salt and diesel. Marcus parked his aging pickup truck beside a repair garage on the edge of town. The truck looked nearly as old as the building itself. Rust spotted the wheel wells. One mirror was secured with a homemade bracket. The paint had faded so thoroughly it was impossible to tell what color it had originally been. Inside sat a worn leather toolbox. The toolbox was older than the truck. Its corners were rounded from decades of use. Its handle had been repaired twice. Marcus carried it everywhere. Nobody knew why. At 42, Marcus looked like the sort of man people stopped noticing after 3 seconds. Work boots. Weathered hands. Simple clothes. Permanent traces of engine grease beneath his fingernails. The kind of person executives walked past without making eye contact. The kind of person wealthy people often assumed existed solely to repair things they didn't understand. He stepped out of the truck and glanced toward the fenced storage lot. His eyes settled briefly on the silver coupe. Then he continued walking. No reaction. No visible curiosity. Just a glance. But something about that glance would matter later. Inside the garage, business owner Arthur Benson was arguing with a customer. Not loudly. The exhausted kind of arguing. The kind that comes after months of repeating the same conversation. "I'm telling you," Arthur said, rubbing his forehead, "we've checked everything." The customer stood beside the counter. Elegant coat. Perfect posture. Expensive watch. Sophia Whitmore had once appeared regularly in business magazines. At 53, she still carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and negotiations. But confidence and happiness are not the same thing. And lately there was very little happiness left. Her family's transportation company had once operated across 3 countries. Their name carried influence. Recognition. Respect. Then came the fraud investigation. The lawsuits. The betrayals. The sudden collapse. Within 3 years nearly everything had disappeared. The company. The reputation. The fortune. Even the people she thought were friends. Only one thing remained. The silver coupe behind the fence. Her late husband's car. The last thing she refused to sell. Arthur sighed. Sophia. Every specialist you've hired says the same thing. They're wrong. They've been wrong 11 times. Then hire a 12th. Arthur looked helpless. Marcus quietly crossed the garage floor carrying a box of parts. Neither of them paid attention to him. At least not yet. Sophia noticed him only when Arthur suddenly said, "Ask Marcus." She turned. For the first time. And immediately dismissed him. The judgment happened almost automatically. Not because she was cruel. Because people are human. And humans build stories from appearances. She saw old boots. An old truck. An old toolbox. She assumed old limitations. Marcus set the box down. Arthur shrugged. He's got an eye for things. Sophia's expression barely changed. With respect, Arthur, I've hired engineers from Germany. Arthur nodded. I know. I've consulted restoration experts who work on six-figure collections. I know. I've spent more on diagnostics than that truck is worth. Silence. Marcus simply listened. No offense. No irritation. No need to defend himself. Because people secure in their abilities rarely feel obligated to advertise them. Sophia offered a polite smile. The kind people use when ending conversations. I appreciate the suggestion. Then she left. The garage door closed behind her. Arthur grimaced. Sorry. Marcus shrugged. Nothing to apologize for. You don't seem bothered. Marcus looked toward the storage yard. Toward the silver coupe. Toward the mystery nobody could solve. Then he picked up his toolbox. Should I be? Arthur watched him walk away. And for a moment he wondered the same thing many people eventually wondered about Marcus Hale. Who exactly are you? Because every town has people everyone thinks they understand. Until they don't. The mystery surrounding the coupe had become local legend. According to every report, the vehicle should have worked. The engine had been rebuilt twice. The electrical systems replaced. Fuel systems tested. Computers analyzed. Sensors changed. Components swapped. Experts examined every major system. Yet every attempt ended the same way. The engine would start. Run briefly. Then die. Every time. No explanation. No pattern. No solution. The failures became expensive. Then embarrassing. Then personal. The car transformed from a restoration project into an obsession. Sophia needed it to work. Not because of transportation. Not because of money. Because grief often attaches itself to objects. And letting go of the object feels dangerously similar to letting go of the person. Her husband Daniel had bought the coupe before they were married. Before the business. Before the success. Before life became complicated. Every important memory seemed connected to that vehicle. Road trips. Arguments. Reconciliations. Children. Vacations. Ordinary days that became precious only after they ended. And now the car remained frozen in time. Silent. Waiting. Or perhaps hiding something. Nobody knew which. Over the following weeks, more experts arrived. One specialist from London. Another from Munich. A restoration consultant famous among collectors. Each arrived with confidence. Each left confused. And every failure deepened the mystery. But while specialists examined computers and diagnostics, Marcus occasionally passed the storage lot. Never stopping. Never interfering. Just observing. Tiny details. The angle of the fence. The condition of the tires. The corrosion patterns. The repair records taped inside the windshield. Things nobody else seemed interested in. Things that looked insignificant. Things that weren't. One rainy afternoon Marcus finally walked through the gate. No audience. No announcement. No expectations. The coupe sat beneath gray skies. Raindrops slid slowly down the windshield. The vehicle looked tired. Like it had spent years carrying burdens that weren't entirely mechanical. Marcus circled it once. Then twice. His eyes moved differently from the experts. Less focused on systems. More focused on history. Because machines leave clues. Not only about what happened. But about who touched them. And when. And why. His fingers traced a repaired section near the rear panel. Not the damage. The repair itself. Something there seemed to catch his attention. Only briefly. Then he crouched beside the driver's side wheel. Studied. Thought. Listened. The rain intensified. Marcus stood. Closed his toolbox. And left. No repairs. No diagnosis. No dramatic discovery. Just another unanswered question. Yet something had changed. Because for the first time in 11 years, somebody had stopped looking at what was broken. And started looking at what didn't belong. The difference seems small. Until it changes everything. And far across town, Sophia Whitmore sat alone in a large house that no longer felt like home. Reviewing invoices. Reviewing reports. Reviewing failure after failure. She believed the mystery was mechanical. Everyone did. Including the experts. Including the engineers. Including the investigators. But mysteries often survive because everyone agrees where they should be looking. The truth hides somewhere else. And somewhere inside an old leather toolbox resting in the cab of a rusted pickup truck. A quiet single father was beginning to suspect exactly that. The question was why. And the answer would uncover a secret nobody saw coming. Not even Sophia. Especially not Sophia. Because the silver coupe wasn't simply refusing to run. It was protecting a story. And before this was over, that story would expose a betrayal hidden for more than a decade. A betrayal powerful enough to destroy lives. And valuable enough to make people kill careers to keep it buried. The forgotten car was only the beginning. The real mystery was still waiting underneath. The first clue arrived disguised as something unimportant. Which, in hindsight, was exactly why it survived unnoticed for 11 years. The following Tuesday began with sunlight. After weeks of fog and rain, Blackwater Harbor woke beneath clear skies. Fishing boats moved across calm water. Delivery trucks rolled through downtown streets. Store owners opened doors and swept sidewalks. The town felt ordinary. Marcus preferred ordinary. Ordinary allowed people to overlook him. And being overlooked had advantages. He was replacing a transmission in the garage when Arthur stepped through the service bay carrying a clipboard. "She's back." Marcus didn't look up. "Sophia?" Arthur nodded. "Another specialist." Marcus tightened a bolt. "How'd that go?" Arthur laughed once. That tired laugh people make when reality becomes repetitive. "About as well as the last 10. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag. Through the office window he could see Sophia standing beside the counter. Even from a distance, exhaustion had settled into her posture. Not physical exhaustion. Something heavier. The kind that accumulates after years of disappointment. Hope can be surprisingly exhausting when it keeps getting denied. A few minutes later Arthur approached him again. "She wants to sell it." That got Marcus's attention. Not visibly. But enough. "The car?" Arthur nodded. "First time she's ever said it out loud." Marcus glanced toward the yard. Toward the silver coupe. Toward 11 years of grief parked beneath sunlight. Arthur lowered his voice. "I think she's finally giving up." For several seconds Marcus said nothing. Then. Can I see the records? Arthur blinked. The repair records? All of them. Arthur stared. For nearly a year Marcus had shown mild curiosity about the car. Nothing more. No recommendations. No theories. No opinions. Just occasional observations. Now, suddenly, he wanted every document. What for? Marcus removed his gloves. Just curious. Arthur smiled. That answer explained absolutely nothing. Yet somehow it felt significant. An hour later Marcus sat alone in the break room. Stacks of paperwork covered the table. Invoices. Diagnostics. Engineering assessments. Restoration reports. Maintenance histories. Thousands of pages. Most people would have focused on the latest records. Marcus started with the oldest. The very first entries. The reports created before anyone realized a mystery existed. Because the beginning often reveals things the ending tries to hide. Outside, sunlight streamed through dusty windows. Inside, pages turned slowly. Methodically. Hour after hour. Then Marcus stopped. A single maintenance record. 11 years old. Ordinary on the surface. Routine suspension work. Nothing remarkable. Except for one detail. The mileage. Marcus compared it against another report. Then another. Then another. His eyes narrowed. Not because the numbers were wrong. Because they were impossible. Very slightly impossible. The kind of impossible nobody notices. A discrepancy so small that every expert had ignored it. 43 miles. That was all. 43 missing miles. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to attract suspicion. But enough to create a question. And questions mattered. Especially when nobody else was asking them. Marcus carried the documents into the garage. Arthur looked up. What did you find? Marcus pointed at the paperwork. When was the accident? Arthur shrugged. Night Daniel died. And the car came straight here. Eventually. Marcus nodded. Then pointed at the mileage records. This says otherwise. Arthur frowned. The numbers looked meaningless. Because to most people they were. Marcus explained. The car traveled 43 miles after the documented accident. Arthur blinked. That can't be right. No. Marcus agreed quietly. It can't. Silence settled between them. A small silence. But important. Because mysteries don't usually crack open dramatically. They crack open quietly. Like ice beginning to split beneath pressure. Arthur leaned closer. Could be paperwork. Maybe. You think it is? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead he looked through the garage window. Toward the coupe. Toward the vehicle everyone believed they understood. Then he said something unexpected. I want to inspect it again. This time he stayed for 3 hours. No scanners. No computers. No advanced equipment. Just a flashlight. A notebook. And the old leather toolbox. The symbolic object that had followed him through half his life. Inside were tools inherited from his father. Some older than Marcus himself. Nothing expensive. Nothing impressive. Yet every handle carried wear earned through decades of use. Every scratch represented work. Patience. Attention. Things modern experts often replaced with technology. Marcus crawled beneath the coupe. Examined welds. Fasteners. Panels. Fuel lines. Mounting brackets. Then he reached a section near the rear frame. And stopped. The silence seemed to deepen. A gull cried somewhere beyond the harbor. Traffic passed in the distance. Marcus remained still. Studying. Looking. Thinking. Then slowly he smiled. Not because he'd solved the mystery. Because he had found proof that the mystery existed. The weld wasn't original. It wasn't even old. At least not as old as it should have been. Someone had replaced part of the frame after the accident. Professionally. Carefully. Almost invisibly. But not perfectly. Marcus touched the metal. The repair wasn't documented anywhere. Which meant one thing. Someone had altered the vehicle. After the accident. Without recording it. The implications landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Small splash. Massive depth. Because if the repair wasn't documented. What else wasn't documented? Sophia arrived the next morning expecting another conversation about selling the car. Instead she found Marcus waiting beside it. For the first time, they spoke alone. The contrast between them remained striking. Sophia in tailored clothing. Marcus in work boots. Sophia carrying the remnants of a corporate empire. Marcus carrying an old toolbox. But appearances had begun shifting. Subtly. Imperceptibly. Like shadows changing direction. Marcus handed her several photocopied records. What am I looking at? 43 miles. Sophia frowned. I don't understand. You will. Something in his voice caused her to listen. Not because it was forceful. Because it was calm. People trust certainty more when it doesn't need attention. Marcus explained the discrepancy. The undocumented repair. The mileage anomaly. The missing timeline. As he spoke, Sophia's expression changed. Confusion first. Then curiosity. Then concern. Because suddenly the mystery wasn't mechanical anymore. It was historical. The car wasn't refusing to start because something was broken. The car was refusing to tell a complete story. And somebody appeared to have removed part of that story. Why would anyone hide repairs, she asked. Marcus looked at the coupe. Depends what happened during those 43 miles. The word settled heavily between them. For years Sophia had viewed the car as a memorial. Now she was being forced to consider another possibility. Evidence. That possibility frightened her. Because evidence implies questions. Questions imply answers. And answers can hurt. A lot. Over the following week they dug deeper. Insurance reports. Police documents. Maintenance records. Witness statements. Anything connected to the night Daniel died. The deeper they searched, the stranger things became. Details didn't align. Timelines shifted. Names repeated unexpectedly. Paperwork vanished. Then reappeared. A witness statement referenced a tow company that officially never responded. A repair invoice listed equipment unavailable at the facility. An insurance assessment contained signatures from employees who weren't working that week. Individually, each inconsistency seemed harmless. Together they formed a pattern. And patterns tell stories. The emerging story wasn't mechanical. It was human. Which made it far more dangerous. One afternoon Sophia sat across from Marcus in a small diner overlooking the harbor. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Coffee steamed between them. For a while neither spoke. Finally Sophia asked. Why are you helping me? Marcus considered the question. Because the honest answer wasn't simple. Eventually he said. Because someone worked hard to hide something. And? His gaze drifted toward the harbor. Toward gray water and fishing boats. Toward memories he rarely discussed. And because hidden things have consequences. The answer felt personal. Sophia sensed it. But didn't push. Not yet. By now she had stopped seeing Marcus as the mechanic she dismissed. That judgment embarrassed her. More each day. Because every new discovery came from observations everyone else missed. Not advanced technology. Not expensive consultants. Observation. Patience. Experience. The old-fashioned skills people increasingly underestimated. Then came the breakthrough. A retired insurance clerk living 2 towns away. 78 years old. Excellent memory. Kept boxes of archived paperwork in his basement. Most people would never have thought to ask him anything. Marcus did. The clerk located an internal file connected to Daniel's accident. A file never included in official records. A file containing photographs. Sophia stared at the images. Her hands trembling slightly. The photographs showed the coupe immediately after the crash. And one detail changed everything. The rear compartment panel had been removed. Not damaged. Removed. Deliberately. The compartment itself appeared empty. But marks inside suggested something had once been stored there. Something rectangular. Something valuable. Something somebody wanted. Suddenly 43 missing miles mattered. Undocumented repairs mattered. Missing paperwork mattered. Because a new possibility emerged. Daniel's accident might not have been the end of the story. It might have been the beginning. Sophia felt cold. Marcus. He already knew. The same realization had reached him minutes earlier. Someone recovered the car. Someone drove it 43 miles. Someone removed something. Someone repaired evidence. Someone buried records. And then, somehow, the entire truth disappeared. For 11 years. Until a forgotten car started talking. Not through words. Through details. Tiny details. The kind only a patient observer notices. The kind hidden beneath dust and assumptions. The kind that reveal what people desperately want concealed. The mystery had transformed completely. The question was no longer whether the coupe could be repaired. The question was what Daniel Whitmore had been carrying the night he died. And why someone went to extraordinary lengths to make sure nobody ever found out. Neither Marcus nor Sophia knew it yet. But the answer would lead directly into the darkest chapter of the Whitmore family's collapse. A chapter involving fraud. Betrayal. Corporate greed. And one decision Daniel made shortly before his death. A decision that would explain everything. Including why powerful people had spent 11 years hoping that silver coupe would never run again. And as Marcus closed the lid of his weathered leather toolbox that evening, one thought remained fixed in his mind. The car wasn't broken. It had never been the real problem. The real problem was that somebody had assumed nobody would ever look closely enough. They were wrong. And very soon, everyone would discover exactly how wrong. The first person to recognize Marcus Hale wasn't an investigator. It wasn't a reporter. It wasn't Sophia. It was an old man standing in line at a hardware store. The recognition lasted less than 2 seconds. A glance. A pause. Then surprise. Marcus? Marcus looked up from a box of screws. The man staring at him appeared to be in his late 60s. Thin frame. Gray hair. Sharp eyes. For a moment neither spoke. Then the older man laughed softly. "I'll be damned." Sophia happened to be standing nearby. She watched confusion cross Marcus's face. Then recognition arrived. Peter Lawson. 22 years. Closer to 23. Peter shook his head in disbelief. "I thought you were still in Boston." Marcus smiled faintly. Not anymore. Peter looked around the store. Then at the rusted pickup parked outside. Then back at Marcus. The expression on his face said everything. What happened to you? But he didn't ask. Not immediately. After Peter left, Sophia remained silent until they reached the parking lot. Then. Who was that? A former colleague. What kind of colleague? Marcus opened the truck door. Long time ago. That answer only increased her curiosity. Because by now she had learned something important. Whenever Marcus gave the shortest possible answer, it usually meant the full answer was significant. And over the next few days she began hearing similar reactions. A retired engineer from Seattle. An insurance investigator. A former executive connected to the Whitmore case. Each person recognized Marcus. Each reacted with surprise. Each seemed confused to find him repairing transmissions in a small coastal town. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Finally Sophia asked Arthur directly. Arthur sighed. You really don't know? No. I figured he told you. He hasn't. Arthur smiled. That sounds like Marcus. The garage owner leaned back in his chair. I didn't know either when he first moved here. And then one day I looked him up. Sophia waited. Arthur laughed softly. That was an interesting afternoon. What did you find? He handed her a tablet. On the screen appeared an old industry article. The headline alone made her stop breathing for a moment. Former forensic engineering specialist helps expose multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. Sophia blinked. Then continued reading. Another article. Another award. Another investigation. Another case. Each connected to the same name. Marcus Hale. The quiet mechanic. The single father. The man with the rusted pickup truck. The articles painted an entirely different picture. Before disappearing from public life, Marcus had built a reputation few people achieved. He specialized in forensic engineering. Failure analysis. Accident reconstruction. Complex investigations involving corporations, insurers, and government agencies. When machinery failed and nobody understood why. When structures collapsed. When evidence seemed contradictory. Marcus was often the person called to uncover the truth. His reports had influenced lawsuits worth hundreds of millions. His findings had exposed negligence, corruption, and fraud across multiple industries. The experts people hired after everyone else failed. That had once been Marcus. Sophia stared at the screen. Suddenly dozens of moments made sense. The questions he asked. The details he noticed. The patience. The observations. The way he examined history instead of assumptions. The mystery wasn't how Marcus solved the case. The mystery was why he was fixing cars in Blackwater Harbor. And that answer proved far more personal. A week later Sophia finally asked him directly. The two sat outside the garage after closing time. The harbor reflected orange evening light. Wind moved gently through nearby trees. For a while Marcus said nothing. Then he looked toward the water. My wife died 12 years ago. Sophia froze. He rarely spoke about himself. When he did, people listened. It happened fast, he continued. No warning. Marcus shook his head. None. Silence. The kind that comes when words become inadequate. After a while he continued. Afterward, I buried myself in work. Sophia understood immediately. Grief often disguises itself as productivity. As long as I stayed busy, I didn't have to think. He smiled faintly. Turns out that's not a permanent solution. The harbor waves rolled softly against the docks. Marcus watched them. I was investigating failures everywhere else. His eyes remained fixed on the water. Meanwhile, my daughter was growing up without me noticing. The admission carried more weight than any dramatic confession. Because it was honest. Painfully honest. Sophia said nothing. Marcus continued. One day Emily asked me if I was coming home for dinner. He paused. I realized I didn't know how many dinners I'd already missed. The silence that followed seemed larger than the harbor itself. That's when I left. You walked away from everything? Marcus nodded. The awards. The career. The recognition. The money. A faint smile appeared. I kept the toolbox. Sophia laughed softly through unexpected tears. The old leather toolbox. The object she'd noticed on the first day. The object everyone ignored. Now its meaning became clear. It wasn't about tools. It was about identity. A reminder of who Marcus had been before titles. Before status. Before success complicated everything. The toolbox represented the version of himself he trusted most. The man who solved problems because they needed solving. Not because anyone was watching. Sophia looked at him carefully. For the first time she truly understood. Marcus wasn't living quietly because he lacked ability. He was living quietly because he had already proven it. He no longer needed anyone else's approval. The deeper investigation moved, the uglier the truth became. Daniel Whitmore had discovered irregularities inside the company months before his death. Not small irregularities. Massive ones. Money moved through shell accounts. Contracts manipulated. Records altered. People enriched themselves while hiding losses from investors and employees. Daniel had begun collecting evidence. Carefully. Privately. And according to recovered correspondence, he planned to expose everything. That decision made him dangerous. Not to strangers. To people inside his own organization. People he trusted. People who smiled during meetings. People who attended family events. People who shook his hand. The realization devastated Sophia. Not because the fraud existed. Because the betrayal came from individuals she had known for years. People she defended. People she trusted. Now the evidence pointed directly toward them. One afternoon she sat alone in her office reviewing documents recovered from the hidden compartment. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows. Inside, decades of assumptions collapsed. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Marcus entered carrying coffee. Neither spoke immediately. Finally Sophia looked up. I spent years blaming the wrong things. Marcus waited. The economy. The market. Bad luck. She shook her head. I never imagined the people around us were responsible. Marcus placed the coffee on her desk. Then said something simple. Most betrayal comes from people close enough to earn trust. The truth hurt. Because it was true. Weeks later, after prosecutors formally opened new proceedings, Sophia faced a decision. Legally, she could distance herself. Protect what remained of her reputation. Claim ignorance. Many advisors recommended exactly that. Instead she did something unexpected. Something that marked the completion of her transformation. She cooperated fully. Publicly. Completely. Every document. Every record. Every conversation. No protection. No excuses. No image management. Just truth. The decision cost her. Financially. Socially. Professionally. But it restored something more important. Integrity. For the first time in years, she stopped protecting appearances and started protecting facts. And in doing so, she finally honored the values Daniel had been trying to defend. The woman who once dismissed a mechanic because of his appearance now understood something fundamental. Status is not competence. Credentials are not wisdom. Money is not character. And the people most capable of solving a problem are often the people nobody notices. The lesson arrived late. But it arrived. And sometimes that is enough. Winter arrived quietly. The storms that rolled in from the harbor no longer felt threatening. They felt cleansing. For the first time in more than a decade, the questions surrounding Daniel Whitmore's death had answers. Not perfect answers. Not the kind that erased grief. But truth rarely erases pain. What truth does is remove uncertainty. And uncertainty had been poisoning Sophia's life for 11 years. The investigation eventually confirmed what Marcus had suspected from the beginning. Daniel had discovered evidence of an internal fraud operation that threatened to destroy the company from within. He had gathered records. Copied files. Documented transactions. Then hidden the evidence inside the coupe's concealed compartment. The accident that took his life had been genuine. The corruption surrounding it had not. Certain individuals learned about the evidence after the crash. Before authorities completed their work. Before the vehicle entered long-term storage. Someone retrieved the coupe. Drove it 43 undocumented miles. Removed what they believed was every piece of incriminating material. Altered records. Concealed repairs. Created confusion. Then returned the vehicle. The cover-up worked. For 11 years. Until a single discrepancy in a maintenance record exposed the first crack in the lie. A 43-mile difference. A detail so small that experts overlooked it. A detail large enough to unravel everything. The criminal proceedings would continue for years. Appeals would follow. Settlements would be negotiated. Headlines would come and go. But those things no longer mattered most. Because another repair had quietly taken place alongside the investigation. One involving people rather than evidence. And that repair was finally ready to be completed. The coupe sat outside Arthur Benson's garage beneath a clear spring sky. The restoration had taken months. Marcus approached the work differently than every previous specialist. He never tried to erase the vehicle's history. He respected it. The goal wasn't perfection. The goal was honesty. The paint gleamed once more. The body lines matched factory specifications. The interior carried the scent of restored leather. The engine ran smoothly. Confidently. As though relieved to finally tell the truth. Yet Marcus intentionally preserved certain details. A tiny scratch near the dashboard. A worn spot on the steering wheel. Small traces of Daniel's presence. Memories disguised as imperfections. The kind worth keeping. Arthur stood beside the garage door as Marcus lowered the hood. "You finally finished it." Marcus nodded. Arthur smiled. "You know, most people would have charged a fortune for this." Marcus laughed softly. "Good thing I'm not most people." Arthur shook his head. For years he had wondered whether Marcus fully understood how unusual he was. Eventually he concluded Marcus understood perfectly. He simply didn't care. Sophia arrived that afternoon. The moment she stepped from her car, she saw it. The silver coupe. Alive again. For several seconds she couldn't move. The sunlight reflected from the windshield. A light breeze moved through nearby trees. Somewhere down the street a church bell rang. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet everything felt different. Marcus handed her the keys. Nothing dramatic. No speech. No ceremony. Just a simple transfer. Metal touching metal. The completion of a promise. Sophia stared at the keys resting in her palm. Then at the car. Then at Marcus. The apology she had been carrying for months finally arrived. Not rehearsed. Not polished. Honest. I was wrong about you. Marcus remained silent. She continued. The first day we met, I saw your truck. A faint smile appeared. And your boots. Marcus nodded. Fair enough. The toolbox. That made him laugh quietly. The toolbox gets mentioned a lot. Sophia's eyes filled slightly. I looked at everything visible and assumed I understood everything important. The words hung in the air. Because they applied to far more than Marcus. They applied to the company. The fraud. The investigation. Even Daniel. Years of assumptions. Years of incomplete understanding. Marcus studied her for a moment. Then said something that surprised her. You weren't the only one. She frowned. What do you mean? I assume things too. Sophia blinked. Marcus shrugged. I assumed you'd never look past appearances. The admission caught her off guard. Because it was true. And because it revealed something important. Even wise people misjudge each other. The difference is what happens afterward. Sophia smiled. Glad we were both wrong. Marcus nodded. So am I. That was the apology. No dramatic embrace. No emotional monologue. No sudden friendship. Just mutual recognition. Respect earned through truth. The scene became powerful because of everything left unsaid. Several weeks later, Sophia drove the coupe along the coastal highway Daniel had loved. The same road where they once spent countless weekends. The ocean stretched endlessly beside her. Sunlight danced across the water. The engine hummed steadily. No warning lights. No mysterious failures. No unanswered questions. Only motion. For the first time in years, the car felt like a memory instead of a wound. She stopped at a scenic overlook. Stepped outside. And stood beside the vehicle while waves crashed against distant cliffs. The grief remained. It always would. But grief had changed. Before, it felt trapped. Now it could move. Like the road beneath the tires. Like time itself. And somehow that made all the difference. Meanwhile, life in Blackwater Harbor returned to normal. Or at least as normal as life ever becomes after truth changes people. Marcus continued working at the garage. The truck remained rusted. The boots remained worn. The toolbox remained old. Nothing outwardly changed. Yet everything subtly had. Customers who once overlooked him now listened. Young mechanics sought his advice. Business owners respected his judgment. People learned an important lesson. Competence doesn't always arrive wearing expensive suits. Sometimes it arrives carrying a scratched leather toolbox. Sometimes it arrives driving a rusted pickup. Sometimes it arrives disguised as ordinary. Marcus never sought recognition. That fact only increased the respect others felt for him. Because genuine competence rarely demands attention. It simply does the work. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Marcus's daughter Emily entered the garage carrying a small envelope. She found him rebuilding an engine. Grease covered his hands. Tools surrounded him. The familiar scene of her entire childhood. Mail for you. Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. The picture showed the silver coupe parked beside a coastal road decades earlier. Daniel stood beside it laughing. Sophia sat on the hood. Young. Happy. Completely unaware of what the future would bring. On the back was a handwritten note. Not from Daniel. From Sophia. It read. You repaired more than a car, asterisk. Thank you for giving the truth somewhere to come home. Asterisk. Marcus stared at the message. Then quietly folded it. Without another word, he walked to his toolbox. The old leather box sat exactly where it always had. Its edges worn smooth by decades of work. Its surface marked by scratches earned honestly. He opened the lid. Inside were wrenches. Screwdrivers. Measurements. Tools passed down from his father. And tucked beneath them were a handful of photographs. Emily noticed. What's that? Marcus smiled. Important things. Then he placed Sophia's photograph alongside the others and closed the lid. The gesture seemed small. Almost insignificant. But symbolism often hides inside ordinary actions. The toolbox had followed him through every stage of life. Success. Loss. Fatherhood. Reinvention. It represented something deeper than tools. It represented values. Patience. Craftsmanship. Integrity. The belief that every problem deserves careful attention. The belief that truth matters. The belief that work done properly matters even when nobody notices. Especially when nobody notices. Years later, people in Blackwater Harbor would still tell versions of the story. The forgotten coupe. The hidden evidence. The fraud. The investigation. The mechanic who solved what experts couldn't. Most versions focused on the mystery. But the mystery was never the real story. The real story was about perception. About how easily people confuse appearance with value. About how often society overlooks the individuals quietly holding everything together. The people repairing roads before dawn. Maintaining machines. Solving problems. Keeping systems functioning. Doing difficult work without applause. The world tends to celebrate visibility. Yet many of its most important contributions come from those who remain unseen. Marcus Hale understood that. Perhaps because he had lived both lives. The respected expert. And the overlooked mechanic. In the end, he discovered something simple. The title mattered less. The work mattered more. And as the years passed, the silver coupe continued moving along coastal roads. Not as a symbol of loss. But as a reminder. A reminder that integrity outlasts status. That truth eventually finds daylight. That hidden value often wears ordinary clothes. And that the people who quietly keep the world functioning are frequently the very people nobody notices. Until the day everyone finally